So I want to be very clear. There are, at the beginning of the book of Genesis, at the very beginning of the Bible, two creation stories. We had the first one a few weeks ago. It's the newer one. It's the more organized one. It's the more regal one. It's the one that draws on other ancient Near Eastern myths and the imagery of a temple. It's the one where God speaks the world into being and looks at each thing that God creates and says, "That is good." And it's the one where at the very end, God rests in the cosmos as though the entire universe was a temple. And I told you then, and I'm going to repeat this now, that story is not a story about the engineering of the world. It's not a story about how, in fact, God made everything. It is a story about what the world is. And I told you then, and I'll tell you again now, that it's a story about how the world, how all of creation and how everything in creation is a beautiful work of art created by God in love. Today we're at the end of the second story. It's probably the older story. It's definitely the more earthy story, the more mythological story, the story that is frankly more of a story with like a narrative and a plot and stuff. God plants a garden. And God takes some earth and molds it into an earth creature. And God gives the garden to the earth creature, saying, "Earth creature, keep and till all of this garden, and you can eat from any of the trees in it. We've got apple trees, we've got pear trees, we've got apricot trees, we've got lemon trees. We've even got a tree of life. Any of those are cool. But don't eat from that tree over there. That's the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. It's forbidden." And then God looks and sees that the earth creature is alone. And God says, "It's not good for the earth creature to be alone. I should make the earth creature a friend." So God starts taking more of whatever and making all of these creatures and presenting them to the earth creature. And the earth creature names them. That is a squirrel. That's going to be a red panda, serpent, sparrow, cockatiel, whale. But none of them are right. None of them quite match the earth creature. So God puts the earth creature to sleep and takes some of the earth creature's side right out and fashions another one. And now there are these two, a man and a woman. And everything is fine. Until one day, the man and the woman are hanging out near the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, where they are not supposed to be. And the serpent is right there. And the serpent is crafty and says, "Hey, did God tell you could eat from any tree in the garden?" And they're like, "Yeah, we can eat from the lemon trees and the apricot trees and the apple trees and the tree of life, but we're not supposed to eat from this tree that we're standing right next to and that you seem to be in." God said when we eat from this tree, we will die. And the serpent says, you're not going to die. It's a really nice tree, and it's got really good fruit. It'll open your eyes. You will know good and evil. You will be like God. And so the man and the woman took the fruit and ate the fruit. And suddenly their eyes were open and they knew good and evil. And they saw that they were naked and they were ashamed. So they hid. It's a garden, after all. There are plenty of places to hide. And then we get to our reading today, where God is walking through the garden in the evening, calling out for the man and the woman. And finally they say, we're here, we're hiding. Why are you hiding? Well, we're naked, and it felt weird, and we didn't want you to see us. Because again, the nudity thing. And God asks, how did you know you were naked? Who told you this? Did you eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, the tree that was forbidden? And they try to pin it on each other. The man says the woman gave me the fruit. The woman says the serpent convinced me to eat. The serpent keeps his fool mouth shut. And then God tells them the consequences of their own actions. This is the start of a sermon series on sin. Sin is one of those really hard things to talk about. It's one of those really hard things to define. But weirdly, to the best of my knowledge, that word does not appear in this story. In my Bible, there are headings that editors helpfully put in to tell you what each story is about. And the very start of this one is the first sin and its consequences. But God doesn't say, you sinned. God doesn't say there was one rule. One rule. And you couldn't follow it. You disobeyed me, and therefore I am angry with you. You people. No. And not only that, but none of the metaphors for sin that show up elsewhere in the scriptures are in here. There's no burden. There's no stain. There's no debt. There's just this thing that the people did and the consequences of doing that thing. The man and the woman wanted to know good and evil. Knowing good and evil is a fascinating little phrase. We often think that it means knowing about morality, and that raises issues like how would they have known that it was wrong to eat from the tree? But we know how it's used in other ancient Near Eastern literature. To know good and evil is like knowing everything from A to Z. Knowing things from top to bottom. Knowing things from east to west. If you know good and evil, you suddenly have the entire breadth of human experience in your life. You're going to know good. You're going to know evil. You're going to know everything in between. So you, serpent, you lose your legs. You crawl on your belly, you live at war. You know good, and you know evil, and you know everything in between. And you, woman, you'll experience love and pain in childbirth, trouble conceiving, all of that stuff. You'll know good and you'll know evil and everything in between. And you, man, remember how every tree used to be available? Now you're going to have to work the soil. You're going to have to hoe and dig and weed and all of that stuff. You're going to have to hope for rain. By the sweat of your brow, you will eat your bread. You'll know good, and you'll know evil, and you'll know everything in between. Behold the consequences of your own actions. Behold the very thing that you asked for. You had a garden, and now you have good and evil and everything in between. It doesn't take much to look around and see that things are messed up. This is not a story about the engineering of the world. This is a story about the state of the world, about what the world is. It is good, and it is broken, and it is that way because of us. The things that our ancestors did trickle down. The things that we do will continue along. Our parents and our grandparents affected us. We will affect our children and our grandchildren. And it doesn't take much to see that things are messed up. That the world is broken, that it is not what it could be, that the breadth of human experience includes good and evil and everything in between. Joys and concerns, triumphs and tribulations. Times of peace, times of war, times of plenty and times of want, times of health and times of sickness. I'm sure you can think of some stories in the news that cover those things. We get all of them. We help create all of them. We live among all of them. And maybe especially right now, it is so easy to see the brokenness of the world. And that is when it is important to remember the first story, where God spoke the world into being and said, "Oh, that is good." The world is good and broken. The goodness of the world does not overshadow the brokenness. There is no imagine how much worse it could be or remember your blessings or any of that kind of stuff. When life is hard, it's hard. When the world is broken, it is broken. When it is time to throw up your hands, when it is time to shout at the sky, when it is time to yell at God, then it is time to do those things. But the brokenness of the world does not overshadow its goodness. At the end of that story, that second story, as God is ushering the man and the woman out of the garden, as God is saying, here is the life that you asked for, you will know good and evil and everything in between, and it is cold out there. God makes them clothes. In the middle of the brokenness of the world, God cares for the man and the woman, for all of humanity. God gives gifts. God bestows them with what they will need to make it. It will be hard, but God is on their side. God is on creation's side. There is still goodness in the world. The brokenness of the world does not overshadow its goodness. And if you want to find God, if you want to see where God is, to quote St. Fred Rogers, look for the helpers. When humanity is buried under rubble, when humanity is sitting on the ash heap, when humanity can't find a way out, God is digging furiously. God is lifting up. God is showing the way. Because as much as we can reap the consequences of our own actions, we can reap the blessings of our own good deeds. We can reap the blessings of our own love. And we can find in that the love of God that multiplies everything. We are affected by the things our parents and grandparents and great-grandparents and great-great-grandparents did, all the way back to those first people. And we can change the story just a little bit. Because we can take this world that is good and broken and find and nurture and care for the goodness and repair the brokenness and join with God in the work of redeeming the world.